like this, we preserve the important point of democracy, accountability to the world community, because they are elected by the General Assembly, which represent the world community, all the member states. And this is a very important point. If we want to have a Security Council that is representative of the world community, then you have to allow the world community to express its voice at regular intervals and decide what the international community want on the Security Council. So far, the G4 have tried many times to push the reform of the United Nations or the Security Council. Why haven't they succeeded so far? Why? Well, for a number of reasons. Of course, for the opposition of the other group of countries, but not just that. Because of the current 5 permanent members, not all of them are in favor of expanding the Security Council to include all these countries. Let's take the United States, for instance. The United States have said that they will support Japan. But that's it. They sort of hinted at a possibility that might support India, but they never said it explicitly. In the 90s, Bill Clinton said he would support Germany. But then George Bush had never said that again. As far as Brazil, the United States have never really said anything about that. China is against expanding including new permanent members. If I can speak frankly here, it's quite obvious, because now China is the only Asian power in the Security Council. If you let Japan and India in, then the sort of geopolitical balance in the Security Council will alter, obviously. Russia has said that they supported Germany at some point, but they're not very warm. So basically, the only 2 permanent members that support the G4 are the UK and France. So that's one of the reasons why the G4 haven't been able to become permanent members. Another reason is that the African group, the United Nations, the 192 countries, have 53 countries that belong to Africa. Now, you don't have a permanent member from Africa. The Africans want to be represented. They say we are a continent that's been historically underrepresented. Our voice cannot be heard. We want 2 seats. We want 2 seats, permanent seats, and we want to have a veto power. Now, that's a peculiar request, because the G4 have said, if we become permanent members, we don't want a veto power. Veto power is even more anachronistic than the status of permanent member. So the G4 quite rightly have said that, okay, if we become permanent members, we're not interested in the veto power. But the Africans insist, if we become permanent members, we want to be full permanent members. So that's an issue that we haven't been able to solve yet. The Africans won't back down. And then there's another point: who would represent Africa? Okay, there are natural candidates: South Africa, Nigeria, but then that leaves out an important part of Africa, that is the Arab world. And the Arab world, and the Arab League in particular, has said that any reform of the Security Council would have to include an Arab country as permanent member. So you see, the African continent is divided. They can't really agree. So that's another reason why we haven't been able so far to have a reform of the Security Council. Now, one can ask, but is it such a bad thing after all? Isn't the Security Council working as it is? I have to say, it is. It is working. It has worked a lot over the past few years. Now we have 20 peace operations, United Nations peace operations, all of them authorized by the Security Council. The Security Council has been involved in many crises in the world, not all of them, but most of them. There are notably two crises, very important ones, that the Security Council hasn't been able to decide about, and one is the Middle East, which is a very, very important issue, as you all know, and the other one is Kosovo, which was dealt with outside the Security Council in a way. But then the Security Council is deeply involved in Afghanistan, Lebanon, all African crises, Darfur, for instance, now, the Georgia-Russia war. But then the Security Council has been, sort of spread its power as well over the past few years. It's dealing now with issues that it never used to deal with, such as terrorism. The Security Council can actually pass sanctions against individuals, not just against states, but individuals, companies, people that are suspected to be involved in terrorist activities. That's very recent. That happened a few years ago. And that's, from a legal point of view, it's a very interesting development. Sanctions against individuals. Then another thing that the Security Council has been dealing with is global warming, peculiar, but since we all think that that's a threat to international peace and security, it makes sense that the Security Council deals with it as well. Also tried to deal with human rights. I say tried because a resolution on Zimbabwe and a year ago a resolution on Myanmar was vetoed. These two resolutions were vetoed by Russia and China, unfortunately. But then, let's not, we shouldn't underestimate the power of the Security Council, but also we shouldn't overestimate it. Yes, it is the center of global politics. Yes, it makes decisions on peace and war. But yes, many, many decisions are taken outside of the Security Council. And then they're brought to the Security Council to be sort of ratified by it. It could be the case of the Georgia-Russia war. It was the French president, as president of the European Union, who went to Moscow and Tbilisi and brokered an agreement. And hopefully, we're going to transform that agreement into a resolution of the Security Council. So maybe, yes, the political process, the diplomatic process that led to that was outside the Security Council. But what is important is that the Security Council still remains the source of international legitimacy. In 2003, the Security Council went through a very serious crisis when it was unable to deal with the Iraq war. But then, funny enough, it was exactly that crisis that proved how important it is to have the legitimacy of the Security Council. And the Americans realized that in Iraq when they saw that it was harder to deal with building the peace in that country without the support of the United Nations. And it's no coincidence that the second George Bush term, the second administration, has changed drastically at the United Nations. They have become one of the most fervent supporters of the United Nations involvement. That's a very interesting development. So that, I hope I've given you an overview of the situation as it is. That, it's a very complex issue, but, I'll leave it to that. Thank you.